The day I walked out of that hospital after 6 months of chemotherapy, I had one thought: I was going home. I had survived. I had made it through the needle sticks and the nausea and the nights when I truly did not know if I would see morning. My body was weak, my hair barely growing back, but I was alive. My neighbor, Mr. Daly, had offered to pick me up, and when he turned onto my street, I sat up straighter just to see my house from the car window. That little tan house with the brown shutters I had worked 7 years to pay down. My safe place. The one thing in my life that was fully, completely mine. We pulled into the driveway, and I stepped out slowly. That is when I saw him, a man I had never seen before, standing on my front porch with a set of keys in his hand, looking at me like I was the one who did not belong there. He told me calmly that he had just bought the house from my sister. I never put my house up for sale. My name is Renee Morrison. I am 39 years old, and 18 months ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. I am a single woman with no kids, and I had spent my adult life building something stable on my own: a small house, 2 savings accounts, and a retirement fund I had been adding to since I was 26. When I got my diagnosis, my sister Tasha was the first person I called. She cried on the phone. She said she would be there for every treatment, every hard day. In those early weeks she was. She drove me to appointments, brought me soup, held my hand in the waiting room. I trusted her completely. She was my sister and the only family I had close by. So when treatments got harder and I was too weak to manage my own paperwork, it never crossed my mind to question what she was doing on my behalf. I was spending every bit of strength I had just trying to stay alive. I thought she was fighting right alongside me. I was wrong about that in ways I am still unpacking. I stood in my own driveway, staring at that stranger on my porch, and my legs went numb. He showed me a purchase agreement with my address, a closing date from 2 months earlier, and a signature on the seller's line. It looked like mine. I asked who he had dealt with, and he said a woman named Tasha Morrison had handled the sale. I looked at the paperwork up close. I was holding documents that transferred my home to a stranger, documents I had never seen, never signed, and never authorized. I got back in Mr. Daly's car and opened my bank app with hands that would not stop shaking. I checked my checking account, then my savings, then the investment account I had been building for 13 years. Every single one had been drained, not emptied in one transaction, drained slowly, steadily. Over the 6 months, I had been lying in a hospital bed too sick to open my own mail. And every withdrawal in the history log had one thing in common. They all showed my signature as authorization, a signature I did not write. The next morning, I went to the hospital records office and asked for copies of every document bearing my name from my entire treatment period. The woman at the desk was thorough and came back 30 minutes later with a thick folder. I sat in the waiting area and went through every page. Most of it was expected: consent forms, medication authorizations, insurance paperwork, discharge summaries. I had signed most of them in the early weeks when I was still lucid enough to hold a pen. But near the back of the folder, I found something I did not recognize. A single document, 2 pages, printed on plain paper rather than hospital letterhead. It was a power of attorney form granting Tasha Morrison full legal authority over my financial and property affairs. The language covered bank accounts, real estate, investment accounts, and any legal decisions during my medical incapacitation. My name was at the top. A signature that looked like mine was at the bottom, and the date printed next to that signature was a date I would never forget. It was the day of my second major surgery. I sat with that power of attorney document in my lap, turning the date over in my head. The day it was supposedly signed was the same day I had been under general anesthesia for a surgery that lasted 4 hours. I was in the operating room by 6 in the morning and did not come out of recovery until early afternoon. There was no window during that entire day when I could have been conscious, coherent, and capable of signing anything. I photographed the form. Then I called my friend Dana, who had gone to law school and worked at a firm downtown. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what I was looking at, and she went quiet. Then she told me to bring the document to her office as soon as possible and not confront Tasha yet. She said if the signature was forged, doing this right was going to matter more than doing it fast. I told her I understood. I sat in that hospital parking lot, and for the first time since standing in my own driveway, I let myself cry all the way through. 2 days later, I went back to the hospital to find a nurse named Patricia who had been on my oncology floor for most of my treatment. Pat remembered everything: names, faces, which patients liked the lights dimmed. I found her at the nursing station between rounds and asked for a few minutes. We sat in a small consultation room, and I told her what I had found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned forward and said she remembered my sister very clearly. Tasha had come in several times during my heavier treatment weeks, sometimes with paperwork. One visit specifically had stuck with Pat because something had not felt right. She said Tasha had arrived with a folder while I was heavily sedated following a procedure. She had noticed Tasha at my bedside with papers, but had been pulled to another patient before she could ask what was happening. She said she would be willing to write down exactly what she remembered. I thanked her. I drove to Dana's office and sat across from her and set the photograph of the power of attorney on the table between us. Dana stared at the date. Then she picked up her pen. I needed to hear Tasha talk without her knowing I was listening, so I called her the next evening and played it careful. I kept my voice soft and tired, the way I had sounded during the worst weeks of treatment. I told her I was confused about some paperwork from while I was sick and just wanted to understand. Not blaming anyone, I said, just trying to piece things together. Tasha relaxed immediately and started talking in a way that told me she had been waiting for this chance, not out of guilt, but out of pride. She said she had managed everything while I was too weak to handle it. She talked about the house sale like it had been a favor. Then, near the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned the name of the lawyer who had helped her handle the paperwork, a man named Gerald Webb. She said it casually, like it meant nothing. I wrote the name down the second it left her mouth. Then I said I was tired and needed to rest. I set the phone down and sat completely still. Gerald Webb. I opened my laptop and started typing. I looked up Gerald Webb the following afternoon. He had a small law office about 12 minutes from where I used to live, and his website listed his practice areas as estate planning, asset transfers, and what he called transition services for medically incapacitated clients. The phrasing gave me a chill. Dana pulled his public records that evening. Gerald Webb had been named in 3 separate fraud investigations over the past 8 years. 2 had settled quietly out of court. 1 was still listed as unresolved. In every case, the pattern was similar: a vulnerable client, a family member with access, paperwork executed outside normal oversight, and money that moved in ways the original client never authorized. He had never been disbarred. He had just kept operating quietly on the edges of what was legal. Dana told me a man like that does not get investigated 3 times by accident, and does not walk away 3 times by accident either. He had systems and people watching. If he already knew I was asking questions, she said, we needed to move faster than he expected. I walked into Gerald Webb's office on a Thursday morning without an appointment. The receptionist asked if I had been referred, and I said I was a potential new client interested in estate planning. She made me wait 15 minutes. Then he came out himself, a trim man in his early 50s, silver hair, practiced smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He led me to his office, and I asked a few general questions about his services, watching his face. He answered smoothly, and then, after about 5 minutes, his expression shifted, not threatening, just knowing. He looked at me and said quietly, without hurry, your sister mentioned you might come by asking questions. He let that sit in the air between us. I kept my face neutral. He was telling me he already knew who I was and why I was there. He was also telling me that Tasha had contacted him recently, that they were still communicating and coordinating their story. I thanked him for his time, said I would be in touch, and walked back to my car. I drove to Dana's office and told her every word he had said. I left Webb's office and drove straight to Dana's. I told her everything he had said. She listened and then told me we needed to change tactics immediately. If I kept going at this directly, Webb would have time to prepare, and Tasha would have time to clean things up. The smartest move was to make them both believe I had accepted the situation, make them think I was too tired and broken to keep fighting. So I called Tasha that evening and made my voice small and defeated. I said I had been to see a lawyer, and it was too complicated and expensive to pursue. I said I just wanted peace. Tasha's whole tone changed. She got warm, almost tender. She said she was glad I was being reasonable. And then, in the comfortable way people talk when they think they have won, she started telling me things she should have kept to herself. She mentioned the SUV. She talked about the new condo like it was just a nice thing that had happened to her. And then she told me, almost laughing, exactly what she had spent my savings on. I kept my voice steady. I listened to every word. She had used my savings to buy a brand new luxury SUV, the kind with heated seats and a panoramic sunroof she had always talked about wanting. She mentioned the payment like the money had materialized from somewhere reasonable. Then she described the condo. New construction, 2 bedrooms, in the newer part of the city. She talked about the finishes like I was supposed to be happy for her. I asked casually whose name the condo was under. She said hers. Then she paused and added that the lawyer's name was on it too, for the financing. I did not react. I kept the conversation going a few more minutes, then said I needed to rest. After I hung up, I called Dana immediately. Dana was quiet for a moment. Then she said if Gerald Webb's name was on the condo title alongside Tasha's, he was not just her lawyer. He was her co-conspirator. And that changed the legal exposure for both of them significantly. I started recording every call from that night forward, and I told Dana everything in real time. We were building something now. About a week into recording the calls, Tasha said something that stopped me cold. We had been talking about nothing much. She was describing furniture she had ordered for the condo. And then the conversation turned briefly to my illness. I had been so sick, she said, really sick for a long time. And then she laughed in that loose, uncareful way people laugh when they think they are completely safe. And she said, honestly, I thought you wasn't gonna survive anyway. Just like that. Casual. Like she was commenting on the weather. I kept my voice completely steady and asked what she meant. She brushed it off and changed the subject. But it was already on the recording. I sat alone that night and played that clip back 4 times. She had not just stolen from me while I was sick. She had stolen from me while counting on me to die. Everything she had done, the power of attorney, the house sale, the bank transfers. It had all been built on the quiet, confident assumption that I would not come back to challenge any of it. And she had been wrong. 3 days after that call, I went to the bank to request full transaction records going back 18 months. The teller typed my account number, and her expression shifted. She said the account history had been restricted under a legal order and could not be released without going through their legal department. I asked when the restriction had been placed. She said about 2 weeks ago. I asked if there was a name attached. She hesitated and said she could only confirm it had come through an attorney of record on the account. I already knew. Gerald Webb had anticipated me going to the bank and had moved to cut off that avenue before I arrived. He had been 1 step ahead, quietly pulling doors closed behind him. I sat in the parking lot trying to think through my options. I had the recordings, Pat's witness statement, and Dana building the legal case. But without the transaction records, there were gaps in the paper trail that a good defense attorney could use. I needed another way in. I sat there long enough that the parking lot started to empty around me. Then I went back inside. I almost missed what the teller did right before I stood to leave. She had been professional the entire time, not giving me anything she was not supposed to. But just as I pushed back my chair She slid a small, yellow sticky note across the counter with one hand, quietly, without making eye contact. I looked down, a name and a 4-digit extension written in blue pen. She said nothing. I folded the note and put it in my jacket pocket. In my car, I opened it. The name was Raymond Chu, and below it, the words Internal Fraud Division. I called Dana. She said to call that number immediately. A bank's internal fraud division operated independently of attorney-placed account restrictions, and if Raymond was willing to talk, it could open everything back up. I called the extension that afternoon. Raymond answered on the second ring. He said he had been expecting someone to call about this account for some time. And then he told me something that made my blood run cold. I was not the first person Gerald Webb and a family member had done this to. Raymond Chu spoke carefully at first, measuring how much to share. But as the call continued, he became more direct. He told me several transactions on my accounts had been flagged by the bank's internal monitoring system during my illness. Those flags had generated an internal review file that was escalated to the fraud unit. And then, 3 months ago, the investigation had been closed and the file marked resolved. Even though nothing had been resolved, the closure order had come from above his department. Raymond had disagreed with it and kept his own notes. He believed what had happened to my accounts was part of a pattern he had seen traces of before, connected to the same attorney of record. He could not share everything directly, but if my lawyer filed a formal fraud complaint with the right documentation attached, the internal file could be legally reopened, and his notes would become part of the official record. I called Dana before I had even pulled out of the parking lot. She started drafting the formal complaint that same night. With the complaint in motion and Raymond's cooperation confirmed, I called Tasha and told her I was done fighting. Too complicated, too expensive. I just wanted my family back. She exhaled with a relief that told me she had been carrying more tension than she showed. She said she was so glad. She said she had been worried about me. Then, 3 days later, she called and invited me to her housewarming party at the condo. The condo I had paid for. She said it casually, like it was just a nice invitation between sisters. I said I would love to come. I called Dana immediately afterward. Then I called the private investigator Dana had recommended, a woman named Sylvia who specialized in financial fraud. I gave her the date, the address, and what I needed. She said she would be parked outside before the first guests arrived. I spent the rest of that week getting everything in order, checking the recorder on my phone, making sure Dana knew exactly where I was going. On Saturday evening, I put on a nice jacket and went to my own housewarming party. About 30 people were there, friends of Tasha's, some relatives, people from her job. The condo was nice. My money had bought her something very nice. My recorder was running from the moment I walked through the door, tucked in my inside jacket pocket. Sylvia was parked on the street outside, documenting everyone coming and going. Gerald Webb arrived about 45 minutes in, holding a bottle of wine, moving through the room like a man with nothing on his mind. He and Tasha greeted each other too warmly for attorney and client, more like two people sharing a comfortable secret. I kept a drink in my hand and stayed near the edges, listening. Tasha was in a generous mood, the kind that comes from feeling safe and untouchable. I watched her refill her glass twice in the first hour. By the time the third glass was in her hand, she had started telling her friends the story of how she had managed all my affairs while I was sick. She told it like a story about sacrifice, like she was the one who had suffered. She told it like an act of love, like she had carried a tremendous burden on my behalf. She said I had been too weak and confused to manage my own finances, and that someone had needed to step in. Her friends nodded sympathetically, saying how hard that must have been, and she kept going. She said she had made sure my assets were handled properly. She laughed and said the house sale had been complicated, but she had pushed it through for my own good. She said I had not been in any shape to be a homeowner during treatment. Gerald Webb was standing a few feet away and did not stop her. He just smiled into his wine glass. I stood near the kitchen archway with my recorder running and my face completely still, listening to my sister describe stealing everything I owned as though she were the hero of the story. I stayed until 9:30. I said a warm goodbye to Tasha at the door, told her the condo was beautiful, and meant neither thing. Then I drove straight to Dana's apartment, with the recording running the whole way there. Dana listened to the party recording twice, taking notes on the second pass. She said it was not a courtroom confession in the strict legal sense, but combined with everything else, it built a picture that was very hard to argue against. We had Patricia's written statement, placing Tasha at my bedside with paperwork while I was sedated. We had the surgical schedule, proving I was under anesthesia when the power of attorney was dated. We had the phone recordings, including Tasha saying she thought I was not going to survive. We had Raymond's cooperation and the formally reopened fraud investigation. We had Sylvia's documentation of Webb at a social event in a property he co-owned with his own client. Dana said she was bringing in a criminal attorney named Mr. Fields, who had handled forgery cases before. She said we needed to move before Webb sensed the shift and made a preemptive legal move. I nodded, and then her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen, and her expression went sharp and focused in a way that made me sit up straighter. Tasha had just tried to move money from an account I had never even told her existed. What Tasha did not know was that Raymond Chu had placed a fraud monitor on my remaining investment account 3 weeks earlier. That account was a retirement fund through my employer, separate and quiet, something I had never mentioned to her directly. Somehow she had found it, likely through the broadly written power of attorney. She initiated a transfer of the full balance, just over $41,000, to an account in her name. The transfer hit Raymond's fraud flag within minutes, and the bank froze it automatically. He called Dana directly. By the time Tasha realized the transfer had not gone through, it was already too late to undo the attempt. She had just tried to steal from a monitored account, while an active fraud investigation was running on her name. Dana called Mr. Fields. He said they were ready to file, and that this transfer attempt was exactly the kind of live documented evidence that turns a civil case into a criminal one. We filed the complaint the following morning before the banks opened. The police executed a search warrant on Gerald Webb's law office on a Tuesday morning. Dana told me about it that evening after Mr. Fields called her. Officers had arrived at opening time and spent most of the day going through every file, every hard drive, and every piece of physical documentation related to cases Webb had handled involving incapacitated clients. They found what they were looking for in a locked filing cabinet in the back office. Inside a folder labeled with my name was a stack of documents, drafts, practice pages, and what appeared to be handwriting worksheets. Pages and pages of my signature, written over and over in slightly varying forms, like someone practicing until they got it right. The forged power of attorney, the house sale authorization, the bank transfer approvals, and sitting on top of the stack, a single loose page that the police photographed and logged as evidence. A sheet of plain paper covered top to bottom in copies of my signature in blue pen. Some shaky, some closer. All of them Tasha's handwriting trying to become mine. The hearing took place on a gray Thursday morning. I sat behind the prosecutor's table and kept my hands folded in my lap. The prosecutor walked the jury through the timeline, my diagnosis, my treatment schedule, the dates of the key documents, the dates of the transactions. She projected the forged power of attorney on a screen at the front of the courtroom and placed my genuine signatures from treatment intake forms beside it. A forensic document examiner took the stand and explained, in plain language the jury could follow, exactly which features of the forged signature did not match my natural writing pattern, the pressure inconsistencies, the letter spacing, the way I curve my lowercase r, which the forged version never got quite right. The jury watched and listened. Tasha's attorney objected twice and was overruled both times. And then, as the prosecutor finished her summary of the document evidence, and the courtroom settled into a brief quiet, the doors at the back opened. Patricia, my oncology nurse, walked in and took a seat in the gallery. Tasha saw her from the defense table, and for the first time since the hearing began, Tasha's composure cracked. Patricia took the stand in the afternoon session. She had written her account down carefully before the trial and testified from memory with the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly what they saw. She described my condition on the day the power of attorney was supposedly signed. She described the sedation level I was under following the morning procedure. She described Tasha arriving at my bedside with a folder and a pen while I was unresponsive. She said when she came back, the folder was closed and Tasha was gathering her things. She had not understood at the time what she was witnessing, and the memory had stayed with her until I came back to find her. Under cross-examination, Tasha's attorney pushed hard on the details. Patricia answered every question without wavering. When the cross-examination ended, the attorney returned to the defense table and leaned close to Tasha. He said something quietly. Then, on the morning of the third day, he filed a motion to withdraw as counsel. Tasha's own lawyer was trying to cut himself loose. The judge denied the withdrawal motion, and the trial concluded on schedule. Gerald Webb had already accepted a plea agreement 3 days before the verdict, cooperating with the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges. His cooperation confirmed what the documents and the recordings had already shown: that he had knowingly participated in the execution of a fraudulent power of attorney, that he had helped facilitate the house sale and bank transfers, and that his name on the condo title was not a clerical error, but a direct piece of his compensation for services rendered. With his testimony added to the forensic document evidence, Patricia's witness statement, the recordings, and the bank fraud investigation report from Raymond Chu, there was very little left for the jury to debate. They came back with their verdict on a Friday afternoon. The judge reviewed the findings and issued her ruling. The transfers were declared fraudulent in their entirety. Every asset purchased with my money was ordered seized by the court. The condo, the SUV, the balances remaining in the accounts Tasha had controlled. Every dollar traced back to me was coming back to me. And Tasha was going to face sentencing for felony forgery and financial fraud. 3 weeks after the verdict, I was on the courthouse steps when Tasha came through the doors behind me. Her sentencing was set. Her assets were frozen. Her attorney had already filed to withdraw. She came up beside me and she was crying, the real kind that comes from someone who has finally run out of options. She said we were family. She said she had made mistakes, but still loved me. She said she hoped one day I could forgive her. I let her finish. I turned and looked at her the way she had looked at me in that hospital room when she thought I was too far under to know what was happening. And I said it quietly and clearly, with every bit of the composure I had held for the past 1.5 years. While I was fighting cancer, you were fighting to steal my life. Then I turned and walked down those courthouse steps without looking back once. The court had said everything that needed saying. My house was being returned. My accounts were being restored. My name was mine again. And I had walked out of that hospital alive, which is exactly what she never counted on.